Go. Hi, good morning. If you could take your seats, please. Hello, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, there you go. So, my name is Neemish Ladwa. I'm the International Conference Manager here at Automotive Logistics, and welcome to the second session of this second day. To get things moving a little bit, we've organized a little Easter egg hunt for you guys. So, if you just have a quick look, I'll give you a clue, you're probably sitting on them. So, have a look and hopefully you find some. Ready your seats. Find it? I promise you they're there. All right. All right. Thanks very much. So at least that's got you up and moving a little bit. I promise you there are some Easter eggs there, so you can have a look and hopefully you'll find there's one there. Fantastic. So welcome again to this second session of the day. This session is focused on rethinking vehicle logistics networks. So in light of course, all the technological and operational advances being made in the sector, is it time for us to rethink our vehicle logistics models and actually challenge the status quo? So this session will explore some of the fresh ideas and fresh thinking, and we'll discuss what can really be done to reinvent today's vehicle logistics networks. So to help us discuss this topic, we've put together a very good panel, starting off here with Steve Tripp from ICL Systems, Christoph Seitz from CFR Rankings, Daniel Gusam from Inform, and of course Charles Franklin from American Honda. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Steve Tripp to the podium and kick off with the first presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neemish. It's always great to be here at Finished Vehicle Logistics. It's really one of my favorite conferences, and I'm happy to be here and happy to be on the program. Today, I'm going to ask all of you to think a little bit. I know it's maybe hard, second day and almost lunchtime, but I am going to ask you to think a little bit, and I'm going to ask you to answer some questions. So I would ask you to get your phones out and get the app turned on and be ready for a little bit of Q&A. And I think this is something almost everybody in the room can have an opinion on too. I mean, we're not looking for a scientific answer. We're just looking for people's opinions, and I think it's something that most everybody in this industry can and should have a opinion on. So be ready for it. Be coming up in just a minute. Before I get to the questions, I'm going to ask a rhetorical question, if you will, and that is, how often should a logistics network be optimized and or re-optimized? And most of you know me from Finished Vehicle Logistics, from outbound transportation, as we called it at Fiat Chrysler and other places. But I also worked for many years in inbound transportation. And in inbound, we ran actually a weekly optimization. We would re-optimize our network on a weekly basis, which seems maybe excessive, but we did. And why did we do that? Well, we did it because change happens. I mean, there was always change in the inbound network. There were assembly plants that would maybe had a down week, or maybe scheduled some overtime, maybe scheduled a Saturday. There could be parts problems that would require changes in schedules. There could be seasonal things like sunroofs are hot in the spring and not necessarily in the winter, so you need more of those. So as a result of all those constant changes, we would re-optimize the network on a weekly basis, because change happens, and in our business, change equals opportunity. If you have the opportunity to minimize the transportation resources required to move your stuff around, and if you don't do that, you're leaving money on the table and you're wasting money. So we would do a weekly optimization of the network. Now, admittedly, that wasn't a blank sheet optimization, so in other words, we didn't change the cross docks. We didn't open and close cross docks where the material moved on a weekly basis. I mean, that would be ridiculous and frankly impossible. So we didn't do a complete clean sheet optimization, but we did do weekly optimization. So with that as a background on logistics optimization, I want to ask you now some questions about, the first question is this: so how often do you think a blank sheet optimization is necessary? So as logistics professionals, what should we do? So Amazon, if you look at Amazon, they're adding a warehouse. It seems like every other week, it seems like they're adding another warehouse to their system. So that's pretty extreme. I think that no one has that kind of growth with their exception. So what they're doing is probably beyond the norm. But the question for you all is, how frequently should we really look at a blank sheet optimization? Where should we open a warehouse? Where should we close a warehouse? Should we have 10 warehouses? Should we have 4 warehouses? Whatever. How often should we do that? So here's the question: should we do it every year? So it should every year. The second one should say every 3 years. So the first one is every year. So the second one every 3 years. Sorry, there's a typo on there. Or every 5 years. Or 5 to 10, or more than 10, or more than 20, or never. So at this point, I'd like you to take your vote. You want it every year, every 3 years, 5 years, or et cetera. So let's take 10 seconds, and let's see what you come up with. We can have the vote. And then, if we can, so there's the result. So every year was 38% or something like that. So basically, somewhere between every year and every 3 years. Those were the two top, with some people saying 5 years, some saying 5 to 10. Okay, so that's good. I think that, frankly, that's about what I would have guessed. I mean, I think it's somewhere in that range too. I would say probably every 3 to 5 years. So I think we're pretty much in the ballpark. Okay, so next question. When you optimize your network, so when you do one of these optimizations, how much of the data should you be using? How much of the data should you use to do this optimization? Should you use 100%? Should you use 90 to 99%? 50 to 90, let's say? 20 to 50, or less than 20? So if you can vote on that now, let me know what you think. I'm missing the music. We always usually had the music when you guys do this. Okay, so basically we're at 50% said you should use 100%, and another 24 said 90 to 99, and another 21 said 50 and above, and then went down from there dramatically. So this is one where, my opinion is, it's probably in the, my view is, ideally, you'd use 100%, but there's often data problems. You may not be able to get it. There may be stuff you have to throw out because it's not quite right. So, I would say either, the 100 or the 99. I would have voted on one of those. So again, I think we're pretty much on the same page. And I'm glad to see this is working out, because it's always dangerous when you're doing audience participation and you run the risk that people aren't going to see it the way you do. So one more question, and then we'll start to get to the point of all this. So the last question is, when you do an optimization of a logistics network, what are the cost elements that you should consider? Should it be direct freight spend only? In other words, the checks that you write to the railroads and the trucking companies and the ocean carriers? Or should it include those immediate checks plus fixed costs that might be involved? Things that aren't checks that you're writing every day or every week, but the fixed facility costs of maintaining a structure. And the third one would be all the freight spend. That would be fixed and variable, plus other metrics like transit time. So which of the three would you vote for this one? Thank you for the music. That's very good. Okay. I think we're, so very good. And once again, I think you got the right answer, so to speak. I mean, the good news is I think we're all on the same page. We all see network optimization pretty much the same way. I think we all would agree that this is how it should be done, and I think we're all on the same page, which is perfect. So that's great. So what's kind of the point? Then I want to get to how does the finished vehicle logistics industry as a whole respond to these questions? So if we're being honest with ourselves as an industry, and we were to go back and answer these questions, not how should it be done, but how has the finished vehicle logistics industry actually done network optimization over the years? So here's what I think the answers are, the truthful answers are. The first one, how often should we do a blank sheet optimization? How frequently should you look at a blank sheet? I would argue that we have never done it. That we always assume that the rail ramps, for example, are in the fixed spot, right? We're not assuming that a rail ramp moves 30 miles east or 30 miles west, or you close a rail ramp or you open a rail ramp. Maybe you do that occasionally in a rare instance in an isolated area, but on a network basis as a whole, have we as an industry ever really taken a blank sheet optimization? I would argue that we haven't. So that's a pretty far cry. We all said we should do it every year, every 3 years, every 5 years, kind of those were the answers. In reality, we're never doing it. So my view is that's a fail. If we were in school and I were your professor, I'd say we get a failing grade on that one. How about the next question? When you optimize your network, how much of the data do you use? Well, most of us thought we should use 100 or 90%. There were some in the 50 to 90, but most people were in the 100 or 90%. I would argue that when we do optimizations as an industry, that we're using less than 20%. Now, why do I say that? Because no OEM that's in this country has more than 20% market share. And I don't think OEMs collaborate when they do these, any optimizations. So therefore, by definition, when OEM A or OEM B does an optimization, they're only using their own data, which is 5 or 10 or 12% of the network. So we're doing this analysis, we're doing this optimization with very, very little information. So again, if I were a professor and I were grading this, I would say fail. We're not doing a good job. So the last one, when you optimize your network, what cost elements do you consider? And I think that most of the time we're using just direct variable freight spend only. Now, this is one of those questions, there could have been a lot of permutations and combinations on here. In reality, I think a lot of analysis people are doing direct freight spend plus transit time, but we're not putting the fixed costs in. We're assuming that the network is static and stationary, and there's nothing that we can do about it. And I'm going to argue that that's a big mistake. That's not good for the industry, and we're leaving a big opportunity on the table. So my view is, as an industry, we have never optimized the entire network. So we fail on the 3 questions. We're not doing a good job. And when we do these sub-optimizations, most of the time we're assuming that the rail ramps are fixed. And by the way, I'm not picking on the railroads at all, because I think that the railroads are running their system just the way I would run their system. They're not moving their ramps around willy-nilly. That costs a lot of money. I mean, they've got tons of investment in those locations, so they're not going to just change them. But no one's asking them to, and at least no one's asking them to with data and with opportunity. So we're going to talk about that. But so again, we assume the rail ramps are fixed where they are, but should they be? Should we assume that? So I think the population in this country has shifted pretty dramatically over the years. And as I said, I worked in inbound and outbound, and I worked a lot of places, but I did start my career at the very, very beginning in outbound finished vehicle logistics, actually at Ford Motor Company. And that was almost 40 years ago. And when I look back at that 40 years, and when I walk around rail ramps here, almost all of the rail ramps that I go to are in the same exact physical location as they were 40 years ago. Maybe not every single one, but most of them are. So we were in an industry where these rail ramps were established 40 or 50 years ago, and things have changed. And so change equals opportunity, as I said. And I also question whether these things were ever optimal. I mean, do you think anybody ever did, a big, major analytical study that said where exactly these ramps should be? So I would argue they were never in an optimal location to begin with. They're certainly not optimal now. Let me give you just a couple examples. So when I think about the Carolinas, North and South Carolina in the United States, we have rail ramps in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Dixiana, South Carolina. Is that where those ramps should be? I mean, I would argue that in the last decades, places like Charlotte, North Carolina, has grown dramatically, right? I mean, the population has shifted. Raleigh-Durham, expands and grows. So should there be in the Carolinas, instead of a ramp in Winston-Salem and Charlotte and Dixiana, should there be one in Charlotte and Winston-Salem? I don't know. I think there's an opportunity there. How about in New York State? How much money do we spend as an industry? How much money, time, hassle, resources do we spend as an industry trucking vehicles across the George Washington Bridge going to Long Island? How many tolls do we pay? How much hassle is there involved in that? What if there were a ramp on the other side of the Hudson River? Could there be? Should there be? Don't know. What about out west? I'll just give one more example, like out in North Dakota. When all the rail ramps that are in existence today, there was no such thing as the back in oil fields. I mean, now there's a huge growth industry out there, right? There's a whole lot of guys buying pickup trucks that are working oil fields in North Dakota, and those cars come into Denver or someplace hundreds of miles away. Should there be a ramp there? I don't know. Until we look at it as an entire network, we're not going to find that out. So what's the value of moving these ramps? And I just pulled a few out of the air. I mean, there are sophisticated modeling tools that are designed to not do what I just did, but are designed to, with math and with data and with calculations, optimize the locations of where these facilities should be. So what would be the value of moving them? I don't know. We'd have to calculate it. Could the savings justify the cost of the move? I think you have to think about it, and I think that the reason that all the industry has to look at this as an entire entity is that no one OEM alone is likely to be able to convince a railroad to shift a rail ramp location, right? If OEM A comes and says, you know what, I could save a few bucks if I had a ramp 100 miles away, or if you close this one and open that one, the railroads are not likely to be receptive to the idea of opening a ramp for just one OEM. But if the industry as a whole makes the calculation that an industry as a whole could save a lot of money by having a ramp in Raleigh-Durham instead of Winston-Salem, and that everybody understands that there's a benefit to that, and that cost can be used and the savings can be used to incentivize the railroad to make the move. Nobody's asking the railroads to make a move like this out of the goodness of their heart or to take it on their bottom line to make things better. There's savings here. What I would argue is that there's savings here to the whole network, and they should accrue to the whole network. If the railroads themselves study the location, which I think they do, there have been some recent new ramps built or some ramps moved, but when that's done, I think the railroads are looking at it from entirely their perspective. What's the best place for me to have a ramp in this region? How does it fit with my network? How does it fit with the train schedules? How does it fit with the way I want to flow my network? And that's good. That's what they should do, and that should be part of any determination about where ramps should be located. But that shouldn't be the only factor. That shouldn't be the sole factor that determines what rail ramps. There should be a collective analysis that says, what's the best place for the industry as a whole? And then if there are savings, they can be shared throughout the network. So just a few more slides. So what would this optimization look like? So first of all, I think the ideal optimization would be all the OEMs going to all the dealers and all the selling locations. So no one entity doing it by themselves. We haven't talked about this at all, but another idea was to include aftermarket in this design. If you look at all the flow of aftermarket vehicles that are out there, is there an opportunity to revamp the whole way the aftermarket vehicle flows if it's looked at as a complete entity, integrated with the flow of finished vehicles from factories to dealers? I mean, has anybody ever looked at that as a network? I don't think so. It would include all the costs involved, the fixed and variable. It would include everything. So I think that's what an optimization would look like. So how easy would that be to do? Well, it would be incredibly, incredibly difficult. This slide is probably one of the biggest understatements I've ever made. But let me just emphasize, this would be a huge, huge task. It would be very difficult calculations to make, but not beyond the realm of what people are doing with data. There are a lot of barriers to make this happen. There are a lot of obstacles. There are a lot of reasons that people might not want to do this or might not want to pursue this, because this would be very, very hard. This would be one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing you ever did in your life and the industry ever did in its life. But this is the good part, the really good part, is that savings that are generated from this kind of analysis would accrue. They're not based on cutting anybody's margin. The idea is you're taking waste out of the system. When you re-optimize a network like this, you're basically reducing the number of transportation resources that you need to get something done. And one of the scarcest transportation resources we have is truck drivers, right? So if we're asking truck drivers, if we could reduce the number of truck drivers we need by 5 or 10 or X% by restructuring the network, then that's savings to the company. I mean, those are trucks that don't need to be bought. Those are drivers that don't need to be hired and trained. I mean, that's fuel that doesn't need to be burned. I mean, that's just pure waste that together we're losing, that together we could share in the savings. So by not taking anything, this is the win-win-win that everybody always looks for, and here it is. Hard to get, but here it is. So now, last slide, would this really, really difficult work be worth the trip? So I tried to give you a quick estimate of what that might be worth. My rough guess is that the total cost of finished vehicle logistics in North America is somewhere in the ballpark of $10 billion a year. Maybe it's 8, maybe it's 9, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 12. But I think order of magnitude, I think all the OEMs together for all their transportation are probably spending on the order of $10 billion a year. And you guys could check that by looking at your piece of the pie and how much you have and trying to extrapolate and see if I'm in the ballpark. I think you find that I'm probably pretty close. So if you were to go to somebody who does logistics modeling for a living, a 3PL, a service provider, optimizer, if you go to or a consultant, if you went to some company and said, hey, I've got a $10 billion network that has never been optimized. I mean, it's never really been looked at as an entity, never been optimized. It's kind of come together over the years and over the decades, but it's never been optimized. And if you went to somebody like that and said, what do you think I could save? What kind of percentage savings do you think I could get? So if you guys are anybody that's in that business, think about it. If you know somebody, I'm going to guess that if you went to somebody like that, you might get a number like 10%. They might say, we might save you 10%. Somebody might say 5 to 10%. You might find the guys that are really trying to get your business, they tell you, I could save 15% on that. I don't know what the number is. I don't know what the number is. But if it's 1% of $10 billion annually, that's $100 million a year. $100 million a year that the industry could share. That could pay to move more than a few rail ramps. $100 million annually, remember, too. This isn't just a one-time event. There's a one-time cost to make a move or something, but this $100 million flows to the bottom line every year. And if it's 5%, and I think, to me that's more of a reasonable number, that's $500 million a year of savings out there. Now there's a lot of money possibly waiting for the right group of people that are willing to work really, really hard to get it. As I said, this is not easy, not in the least. It would be one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing we've ever done as an industry. But has anybody got any idea of anything that we could be working on that could save the industry $500 million or a fraction of that? If anybody had a $5 million idea, they're excited as hell, right? I mean, if you found something that could save $5 million, you're turning yourselves inside out to save that money. What if something's got the potential of being $500 million? My opinion is it's at least worth a look. And yeah, there are obstacles, and we can talk about it in the Q&A. Yeah, there are barriers. But my opinion is there's an awful lot of money out there, potentially, if somebody's willing to do the hard work it would take to get that savings. So that's my challenge to the industry. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Steve. That's very interesting. of course, we're always constantly looking to save money. So and taking that holistic approach to how we rethink and redefine the network is of course, very interesting. So we'll continue that discussion along the way. Next up, I'd like to introduce Christoph Seitz from CFR Rankings to come and share some of his thoughts.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for staying so late for this relatively late session in the conference. The reason I put the Neanderthal there is because I think our company has kind of a very unique story and a unique perspective on the finished vehicle logistics industry. We essentially started as a classic car and used car shipper, and the picture from in the middle with the classic cars, that's how we shipped until about 8 years ago. And we've made a dramatic evolution since then to where we're now recognized in industry as one of the premier shippers of cars and containers using racking systems. And in order to get there, we had to go, it's been a very difficult road for us because essentially when you come in as a relatively small company and a niche player in the area of shipping cars in containers, it's not necessarily the top priority on an OEM planner's or buyer's agenda. So our entire discussion, our sales discussion, our marketing discussion is always about how to optimize their network. And we have to come with arguments that hopefully will convince them that a fraction of their business will be able to go in containers. I always tell people we have no illusion about the fact that RoRo, buy and try level, truck will always be the primary mode to move finished vehicles. But we're showing that a significant amount can go in containers, and all we need is a certain fraction of the overall volume, which would make us and our competitors very happy. But really the challenge is to get to the OEM and to have even have a discussion about the optimization and then working with them on optimizing. And we've gained a lot of experience in that area, especially the last 12, 14 months. I lead that effort at our company and have visited with all major OEMs in the US and in Europe. We've also met with multiple startup companies, primarily electric vehicle companies. And I think that through that process, we've learned a lot. We didn't come from that industry, so a lot of this was new to us. And we really learned the hard way of what the pain points are and how difficult it is to convince an OEM to really think about changing their network or optimizing their network. So I think that because we have that unique perspective, I have some interesting details to share that you might find interesting. Real quick about our company, for those who don't know, we're basically a freight forwarder. We operate our own warehouses. We have our own trucking company. We have offices in Europe and in the US. And we really specialize in cars and containers and using racking systems. That's our key business. Last year we did a little over 40,000 cars. This year we'll see. It could get to that 75 number, but there's the curve of opportunities has dramatically gone up, so I'm pretty optimistic that will be a lot more. And people are often surprised when they see that number. They expect that we do maybe a few hundred or a few thousand. They don't expect that it's tens of thousands of cars. We operate globally, meaning we have agents around the world that we train and set up to be experts like us, and so that we can offer the same type of standard that we offer directly to our clients. We want to be able to offer that service also through our agents globally. Some of you for sure know us for our Tesla business. We're known as the Tesla guys, basically. We've done that since 2013 in actually quite high numbers. People are always surprised when they hear the numbers, so has given us a lot of experience. We do everything from the entire forwarding process. So we do the loading, the unloading, forwarding, container pool management, et cetera, et cetera. And it's given us a lot of insight and understanding and expertise in managing that type of process. Some other projects that we're doing either as an ongoing contract or on a project basis. There's a couple of types of racking systems. One is a so-called cassette system, where the cars are loaded externally onto the system and then put in the container. And there are collapsible systems where the cars are loaded into the system inside the container. This is a slide from last year, which was really sort of at the beginning of the process of doing an aggressive marketing and sales push. And I'm bringing it up again because back then the main point that we like to point out to anybody who wants to listen is that there's a lot of containers floating around the world. And at a minimum, 25% of that container pool moves empty. Some people easily estimate it at 50%. So there's an insane amount of empty space floating around that the ocean liners are perfectly happy to sell at a relatively low rate, which makes the containerized option quite attractive. So when we go into meetings with OEMs, and by the way, we do that primarily by partnering up with container lines. It's been an extremely helpful process. 3 of the top global carriers have recognized us as experts and have said, hey, we like this. We have to think of new ways to drum up business. We think there's something there. You guys are doing the Tesla business. Let's look together at how we can potentially drive this forward. And obviously, they all have very good relationships with car manufacturers due to the inbound parts process. And this has been very successful for us to get the foot in the door and being taken seriously and recognized. So other than the empty container opportunity, we talk about specific items, and I've outlined them here, and some of them match up with what Steve was just talking about. So there's, in our opinion, quite a few advantages to going containerized, and especially containerized with racking systems. But the car manufacturers do not necessarily care about all of those. And by the way, I might be a little bit provocative towards car manufacturers, a little bit towards RoRo, a little bit towards large logistics service providers. But I don't mean that in a bad way. I think that because we are a niche player, we do look things at a little bit differently, and some of it could come across as if we know everything better, which we don't, but we do think we have an interesting alternative. So some of these things are not that interesting to the OEMs. They don't want to talk about it, but others are. So what are the key items that we take away from these meetings? The top headaches, as we call them, when we sit down with people, at least what they are willing to share with us. Obviously, always cost. That's always number one. Will probably never change. A big one is capacity and congestion. Just this week, we received 2 requests from 2 major OEMs globally about rail capacity issues here in the US, asking if we could provide an alternative just on a project basis, and each of these projects would have been 1,000+ cars. So if that happens just this week, then I'm sure there's regular congestion and capacity issues that make it difficult. And I think the rail terminal and rail theme pops up almost in every session. So that's really a big one. Another one that might not be on everybody's radar so much is the fact that a lot of these lanes that are headache lanes are because they're importer driven. Meaning the dealership group or whoever the importer is at the other end, especially on lower volume lanes or on more exotic lanes, there's a so-called push and pull by the importer where they one month they say we need X amount of cars, the next month they slow down. So the planners apparently have a lot of issues with planning the outbound chain effectively when somebody who has quite a bit of leverage at the other end keeps changing their mind, to put it in simple terms. So that's a big issue, and the hope of the car manufacturer is that by going containerized and basically giving it to one forwarder that can manage the entire process, they take a lot of headaches away. So that's a big one that we've taken away from that process and that we think is going to be a big deciding factor and a good argument for us in the future. Oops, sorry, I keep switching. Odd destinations, especially the Caribbean comes up a lot, and then small islands in the middle of nowhere are definitely a pain point. Often has to do with transshipment, RoRo transshipment or infrequent sailings, very long transits, all kinds of issues that are related to getting a car to an off destination. Another one that I think is interesting, and I don't think there's a solution in the traditional model, and I think that will take hold in the future, that the car manufacturer will say, if we have to deliver X amount of cars from A to B, but along the chain we have to manage the first vendor who gets the cars to the port, then we have a port processor we have to manage, then we have an ocean liner we have to manage, customs broker. So there's all these different chains along, or these segments along the chain that make the process extremely time-consuming and prone with issues. And the hope of the car manufacturers, and we had discussions now with 3 major manufacturers, all out of Europe, that have embraced us and have said, listen, let's sit down and really brainstorm, because we like the idea of passing on entire book of business on these, let's call them problem lanes, and you have them managed by a forwarder in a containerized mode, because then that entire headache is given away. We hand over the batch of cars every week or every month or whatever it is, and that problem is taken away from us. And by the way, it's because of what we do for Tesla, we've proven that that's possible. We can take that entire issue away that the manufacturer has to deal with all these different legs. Internal bureaucracy, it's not really the planners or the buyers that are opposed to change. That's our experience, at least, and especially over the last year or so, I feel there's been a dramatic change, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But often it seems that the hurdles are more in other departments or higher up. So while they think that there is an opportunity to look at a specific lane and change it, others in the organization may be opposed to it or block it. Damages, some OEMs tell us they have no damages in the RoRo and the buy and try level process. Others readily admit that there are issues. I'm sure that it does vary from OEM to OEM, but not necessarily every OEM will openly say that they have issues with damages. I think it's just natural that when you have 15, 20 handovers in a process, the opportunity for damage is a lot higher than if you only have a couple of handovers in the containerized process. So there's, in my opinion, and just as really based on hours and hours of meetings and conversations with the logistics people at OEMs, is that there's definitely a change taking place over the last 12 months. Whereas in the beginning of that process, we had a lot of resistance and a lot of doubt and skepticism. And now there's some real willingness to really look at it. And like I mentioned, we're very close with one major OEM in Germany that is interested in really converting these problem lanes to containerization. And my sense is, I haven't had that specific discussion, but my sense is that there's so much change in our industry and in the world in general, which is not just cost-driven, but based on all the fast developments happening these days. Everything that has to do with technology, which has been discussed plenty here at the conference. I think the electric vehicle revolution plays a big part of it. If I read the automotive logistics news every day, and the amount of OEMs that have announced electric cars coming online in the next few years has dramatically increased, as most of you know. And I think there's this sense of we have to do something, and we have to become more creative and more flexible to not miss the boat. I think Tesla, thanks to Tesla, they sort of started that trend, and my sense is of all these conversations is that everybody has the feeling they don't want to miss the boat, and they're looking at alternatives. And I'm not just talking about containerization, but any kind of optimization in the process. And then green, even though it's not on the top of the agenda, and I don't think it's necessarily driving decisions yet, but what everybody is saying is that there's a directive from up top that the organization has to become more environmentally friendly, carbon emissions, et cetera, et cetera. So we believe that in our process, or we don't believe, we sort of know there's overall less movement of the car and other reasons why containerization can be more environmentally friendly. So that might play a bigger and bigger role in the future. One issue that we've discussed, for example, yesterday in the think tanks and also in various other discussions is the lack of data visibility. Again, with the one specific OEM in Germany that we're having very close discussions with about converting some lanes is being very open with data. They provide us with a lot of information, and we can ask them questions, and they come back and give us data because they understand that we need data in order to offer a better solution. However, most OEMs will not do that, and as we discussed in this conference, it's probably not going to happen on a big scale that suddenly everybody's going to share their information. Luckily for suppliers like us, and I'm sure others are doing the same, data is becoming more and more available. So what we're doing in order to understand the market better and be able to match up lanes and match up empty containers with outbound moving vehicles and so on, we've started to just buy a lot of data. We've spent a lot of money the last few months just assembling data from all kinds of sources that allows us to independently from the manufacturer, independent from logistics partners, independent from steamship lines, to assemble our own data and build models and do comparisons and so on. So it's just a snapshot of some data that we've assembled. And I think that's only going to increase, and the fact that companies like Flexport and others are popping up and getting a lot of funding is, I think data will really be the changer in the future in terms of optimization. And then lastly, I always think it can't hurt to look towards China. As we discussed yesterday briefly in the think tank discussion, China had the advantage that they started this process just recently, in the big scheme of things, which has allowed them to start new and build, in some ways, smarter networks. And I always give the cell phone example. When I'm in China, I always feel like I'm years behind. Everybody is doing everything from their phone, while we're still doing stuff from our laptop and from our cell phone. And we do all different types of modes. There, everybody has everything from a cell phone. I'm not saying that everything is necessarily good development, but when it comes to thinking differently and thinking smarter and thinking more efficiently, it can't hurt to look towards China. That's all I got. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Christoph. That's interesting. I think when always looking at how you re-optimize something, all options are on the table, right? So that's what we need to consider here. So next up, I'd like to invite Daniel to take the stage from Inform. Thanks very much.
All right. So we're talking about rethinking networks, but before we move forward, I think we have to address some of the three biggest issues that we see that are holding us back. Before we integrate blockchain, before we talk about telematics, autonomous, we really have to take a look at what we're doing today and how that's costing us a lot of money. So just to give you guys some background, my name is Daniel Goss, and I'm a consultant at Inform. I work on the business process side. So I work with railroads, port processors, OEMs, as well as trucking companies to try to figure out and overcome some of the challenges they have in their logistics world, as well as to future-proof their processes so that when some of these new technologies come forward, they're not scrambling to keep up. Some of you might know Inform as well, but some of you might not. If it will go, there we go. So Inform works in the finished vehicle logistics world. We have some other divisions that work in other logistics niches as well. But our division focuses on automotive logistics and specifically finished vehicle logistics. So as you can see from the slide, we work in a various number of areas within this realm. And the biggest thing that really differentiates us is that we don't manage these processes, we optimize them. So there's one thing to manage it. A car has an engine, but a supercharger is a much nicer engine. It's a lot faster. It gets you from A to B a little bit quicker. So we are basically the supercharger that gets slapped onto the management portion and gets going. So just to give a little bit more background, in 1969, we started as a company coming out of the University of Aachen for operations research. So that's our background is in operations research and mathematics. In 1985, we produced our first software application, which also marks the first year of our 33-year streak of profitability. So year over year, we're continuously profitable. And then in 2017, we support customers globally with over 1,000 installations. I would say it's much higher than that at this point. And at the end of 2017, we had over 700 employees working worldwide. Our office in the US is based out of Atlanta. So when people were bringing up bad traffic, I know all of your pain. And our headquarters is in Aachen, Germany, where we initially started. So first mistake that we're making shouldn't be too big of a shock. We're trying to tackle 21st century logistics with 20th century technology. So what does that mean? It means that your network planners are using Excel with pivot tables to do your network design and optimization. It means that you have homegrown solutions that could be potentially older than me. So we did a study in 2017, and 51% of respondents said that technology is seen as a competitive advantage, while less than 10 said that their current IT platform is suitable for their needs or that they're happy with it. So just to kind of work further on that point, this is what Excel and some of these legacy systems basically relates back to. So 20 years ago, this might be you. Camcorder, cassette player, mobile phone if you were really cool. And so you had a device for every single need, where today's business is, as Christoph mentioned, being done from a cell phone. So a lot of you today probably have answered work emails, followed up on some issues that might be happening back home, done a good majority of all of your tasks right through your cell phone. So your network planners, your network optimizers align more with the left image than they do with the right. And so you're asking them to overcome these challenging tasks without giving them the tools that they need. They're spending more time updating their pivot tables and making sure that they're working, and less time managing and optimizing your networks, which is realistically going to save you money. So just to keep going on the same study, 45%, 5 years old. Over a quarter of the respondents had systems that were 11 to 20 years old. So technology is exponential, and to have a system that's 11 to 20 years old is very far behind. Mistake number 2, developing your networks one piece at a time. I'm not sure if anyone as a kid did this or anything like that, but if you take 2 toilet paper rolls, you can make binoculars. But if you're developing your network one piece at a time, you're not getting the whole picture. So if we are the planner, for example, we might be developing our North American network, and we've taken it, and we're only doing railroad because railroad comes every 5 years. We go out for a bid every 5 years, or maybe we're doing the trucking sector, and that's every 3 years. So we're only doing a piece at a time, and then we further shrink our size down by only doing region at a time. So if I'm doing this for the trucking sector, and I'm using my binoculars there, everything looks pretty good. I might publish this and say, all right, cool, here's your routes, we're set. But if we zoom out, the rest doesn't look that well. A network is a web, so when I make changes in the southeast, the northwest is going to be affected. When I make changes with my railroad network, my trucking network is going to be affected. And so unless we start planning on a whole, kind of to Steve's point, an industry-wide plan and optimization would be great, but even as your organizations themselves, whether it's OEM, rail, or truck, independently, to look at your entire network is where you actually start to realize some of these savings potentials. So we've done some studies over in Europe. We've done some studies here in the US that have been significantly successful, where we've looked at the entire country as a whole, the entire network as a whole, for rail as well as for truck. And if you do holistic planning, 5 to 10% is achievable of your overall operating costs annually. So if you're a network planner, you know what your operating costs are, or probably a lot of people know what their overall operating costs are. So 5 to 10% is a big chunk. And that's while ensuring stability and service. So if you've paid attention to the news, KFC's gotten in trouble because they tried to cut their network costs down by switching suppliers for their chicken, but they didn't see that they weren't able to service and supply the amount of chicken that they needed. So that ruined Fried Chicken Fridays at the Ultimate Media Group's office. It was a bad day. All right, so mistake number 3, the not so connected network. So what do I mean here? What I mean is that when we were discussing yesterday about giving ETAs to the customer or to the dealer, which in general is who we're delivering to, I'm that customer, and I bought a car recently. And I had a third party that was going to purchase my old vehicle from me. And I went to the dealership. We worked out a great deal online because I am, I guess, falling under the millennial stage. But I did everything over email, had a great deal, went in to sign the paperwork, and they said, great, your car is going to be here in 9 days, hopefully, maybe 2 weeks. And I said, how could that be? I looked on your website, and it said it's in transit. It was an allocated car going to that dealership, currently in transit, and they were telling me 9 to 14 days that it was going to take to get there, but they didn't have any clear window of when it would show up. So I said, all right, great. Hopefully it's 9 days. Hopefully it's here soon, because I promised this other party that I would get rid of my car in 7 days. Within the next week, they were going to be taking ownership. It didn't come in 7 days. That dealership had to give me a loaner car, which was great on them. The service was amazing, very excellent. But now I put miles on a brand new car that they had to give me as a loaner because they weren't able to let me know exactly when my car was going to be there. And it doesn't have to be that your car is going to be here on Wednesday the 15th at 2 p.m., but a 2-day range should be able to be delivered to that dealership so that they can relay that to the customer. One of the fears yesterday was that if you give people information, they're going to follow up on it. So for the railroad, if there's a 2-day dwell planned, that's okay. If I check my package on UPS and it says that it's going to be delivered in 4 days, if it's sitting for 2 of them and it still says it's going to be delivered on that 4th day, I'm okay with it as a customer. So, we should be able to talk with our partners, talk with our logistics service providers, and share data in order to create ETA windows that are accurate for the customers. Because in the end, I had already worked out a great deal. I wanted that car. I tried to talk to other dealerships, but they were slow to get back to me, so I wanted to buy it from that dealership. But if I had been looking at 3 different makes, I could have went and bought something from somewhere else. And so if you're not able to service your clients that way, people have a very small amount of patience today. They're going to go buy something else if they don't know when their car is going to come in. So doom and gloom, now how do we avoid becoming that Macy's? How do we avoid having Amazon kind of ruin our business? We have to make changes. Even incremental changes, as was mentioned yesterday, add up to big changes. So we have to start utilizing our finished vehicle logistics technology providers. Those systems that are 20 years old, we really have to work on them. We have to get them replaced. It's time. Challenge the status quo. Stop designing networks one piece at a time, one segment at a time. Start using holistic planning in order to make drastic changes within your organizations. And then lastly, communicate with your network partners. So there's no reason that things just show up to the next party. You should be able to share data so that they're able to plan how many drivers they need, or plan, making sure that they get that car from the port processor in time so that they can add that next car into the haul-away area. All of these things are incremental changes that add up to big changes within the industry, and make sure that when change does come from an outside party, we're not scrambling to catch up. All right, well, that was pretty much it. Thank you for your guys' time.
Thanks very much, Dan. That's very interesting. I think, as it is important to have all the options, we need also to have the right tools in place as well in order to optimize this network. So thanks very much, Dan. Next up, I'd like to invite Charles Franklin to come and make some comments. Thank you very much, Charles.
Hello, everybody. Hope you're still awake, and I'm between you and lunch, but keep in mind you're between me, so you better look out when I finish. I don't have a presentation for you because I refuse to do one, because I kind of overheard Neemish and Lewis talking, and they may have automated it, and they would have just put my slides up here, and I would have had nothing to do. So you got to watch these guys. And it's interesting. I'm listening to autonomous driving, and I'm thinking about it. And I like the future. My people would tell you I'm Mr. Gadget. So you got a new toy, I probably have one. But give me something I can use. Why would, if any of you should buy a new Acura NSX and choose that you don't want to drive it, I will be your autonomous driver. Okay, because me personally, I want to drive the cars that I buy. So give me something better. If you want to give me, automate something, automate the sit-ups and the push-ups that I got to do every morning, but I still lose the weight. That's what I'm looking for. I'll buy it today. Okay. But at any rate, they talk about the network, and I look at the network a little bit different than these guys because I'm not trying to change the industry. As I told you last year, my job is to sell cars. So I'm not designing rail networks or trucking networks or ocean schedules or any of that stuff. That's not my job. My job is to move these cars and sell these cars and get them to somebody on time so they don't buy somebody else's car. And so when I look at my network, and it was interesting, I was listening to Steve, and he said, how often do you optimize my network? And I got a couple of people in the room who admit to this. Every shipment should be optimized. When that car needs to get there, if there's something in the way from it getting there, the first thing I would ask them, did you check somebody else? Because I need to get that car there today or whatever day I've promised it. So we optimize every day. And I think sometimes we forget to keep the word logic in logistics. And again, we have this habit of doing what we did yesterday. So I'm shipping this car, I'm doing this, let's do what we did yesterday. And again, my people will tell you, for them to come and tell me that the reason they did something was because that's the way we did it in the past, that's the wrong answer. So I don't accept that, and they know not to bring that to me. So when we optimize our network, we were successful on a few things, and I think sometimes that even the competitors are locked into the past, and they don't compete. I think, trucking companies tend to compete with trucking companies, vessel companies compete with vessel companies, rail companies compete with rail companies. Okay, but that's very limited. A commercial that this made me think of, if you remember Delta Airlines years and years ago, they're talking about their customers and they're losing sales, and their competitor was the telephone. Because they said now people are having telephone conversations instead of flying. And so trucking companies and vessel companies should be competing with rail companies and trucking and other industries. And so, for instance, someone brought up in one of the earlier presentations, short sea short sea to Mexico. We're sending 50,000 cars a year short sea to Mexico, and everybody's saying you can't do that and it couldn't be done or it would be too expensive. I'm short seeing to Mexico for less than I could have railed, and zero vandalism as a result. But they say you can't do that. And similarly, leaving Mexico. We have zero for the last 15 months, zero vandalism exiting Mexico. People said, for that volume, you can't truck. And then I said, why? And I went to my provider and I said, can you do this? And they said, yes. I said, okay, let's do it. And so again, I don't even consider the provider's network. I'm very selfish. It's all about me. So I'm saying, I got these cars. This is where they need to go. Can you help me get it there? And if your rail yard is in, who cares, Fayetteville, Arkansas, if it's easy for you to get my car to the destination going through Fayetteville, Arkansas, or Dakota, I'm cool with that, because I don't care. You manage that. All I'm saying is I need to get from A to B in this amount of time for this much money. Can you do it for me? And so, in fact, last RFP that we did for C, we didn't say a port. I said, I have this many cars going out of the East Coast, going to these destinations. Tell me which port you can best service me from. Because I want you to be able to give me the best service for the best cost. So tell me where you do it. And in fact, we have an RFP coming out this fall. I'm not even going to say East or West Coast. I'm going to say I have this many cars going to these countries. Where can you get them to me for? Because if you look at it right now, traditional, same old stuff. If you want to go from the U.S. to Asia, you go out the West Coast. I currently do all of my shipments to China off the East Coast. And I save nearly $800 a car. So therefore, that vessel company should be thinking, I can compete with the rail, because rail inland cost is amazing compared to water cost. And similarly, I was laughing as we did a conversation prepping for this. Truckers, and I don't want to have anybody hate me tomorrow, but trucking companies typically consider themselves a backup for the rail, inclement weather, car shortage, everything else. Why not position yourself to be just, hey, I can just take these guys out if you can promise me the volume? But see, we're all so used to being our thing. So at any rate, when I say rethink the network, we don't have a network. We don't have a way, this is truck, this is vessel, this is train. We have a manufacturing facility and a customer, and however we can get it there, and if somebody can figure out how to put them on horseback without damaging them and get them on time, I'll consider it. And that's a serious deal. So I don't want to rechange the world, rethink the world, but I want to partner with you, and I even partner within our own house. We have a big initiative, and when I say we, me and my team, to where we have meetings now with the manufacturing facilities, with the design facilities, and with the sales group, because see, every one of them, even at home, they're only thinking about sales. They're only thinking about manufacturing. They're only thinking about design. And I said, yeah, but when you guys finish that, I got to get it to them. So, and you need to know how your design impacts sales and how your manufacturing impacts all of this, and that makes your network so much tighter and so much easier. And so when I think the network, again, I don't have a network. The network for me is A and B, and then all of you in the room help me connect those dots. And you need to do it rather than changing your game, make your game the best wherever it is and tell you, Charles, this is how I can do it for you best from here to here. And if you can do the best, then I'm going to stay with you and we're going to move the cars. So not a lot of fancy stuff, data analysis, whatever. In fact, in closing, I think sometimes, again, we take the logic out of logistics, and my people will tell you that I also bring up all the time, I said, I'm looking for sling blade moments. And I don't know if you've seen the movie, but Sling Blade was a gentleman that was mentally challenged, but he was mechanically very, very good with lawnmowers and things. So you got these 4 very smart, normal guys working on the lawnmower, and they couldn't get it going. And they said, well, hey, you know, this guy, he's pretty good with engines. Let's call him over here and see if he can look at it. And again, he's mentally challenged. He come over, he looks at it, he grunts 2 or 3 times. He says, ain't got no gas. And he walks away, see? So a lot of times we're reinventing these networks and all this stuff, and it's there. We're just looking for something that's right in front of us. So anyway, thank you for my time, and enjoy your lunch.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Charles. It's always interesting. Always bring it down to the lowest common denominator there. So thank you. Of course, this is an interactive session, and I'd like to invite you all to participate and ask questions and share your ideas. So if there are any questions, please put your hands up. We can certainly take a question from the floor. I have questions myself, so as Charles says, you're not going to get your lunch any sooner than if you stay quiet. So I think we've got a question right at the back there.
Yeah, hey, Chuck Kendig with Honda. Charles, I have a really difficult question for you. No, I'm just kidding. This one is for talking about containerized shipment of vehicles. What kind of volume capacity have you guys got, and how do you compare to ro-ro rates?
Excellent question. Technically, unlimited capacity. It's a question of volume commitment and lead time. I think the only limiter you could really look at is the container vessel's capacity. So if you have a specific lane where you need a large amount of empties, and either the steamship line doesn't have the empties or they don't have the capacity on the ship, that's the limiter. But to give you an idea, our record day at Tesla, for example, was 220 cars in a day, just recently, a few weeks ago. And that's where we have an operation right next to the factory up in Fremont. That's about 35 people. That's admin and physical labor. But we could easily scale that. It's just currently we're just working on one shift, actually. We optimize it so much that we're working on one shift. We could easily work 24 hours and bang out 600, 700, 800 cars in 24 hours, So I think, the biggest challenge really is finding empty sometimes, especially with high volume business. We sometimes have to scramble and really use our resources and connections and experience to scramble for empties. That has been the biggest limiter. And sometimes, we actually work really well with all the major carriers to where getting space is not necessarily the issue. But as everybody knows, during peak times and for other reasons, sometimes vessels are full, and the container line will look at who are they going to bump first, and then it's a matter of how much leverage the car manufacturer has that's in the container. So, but my general answer is whenever people ask, where can you guys go? How much can you ship? Can we do 100,000 car lane? That's going to be tough. That's a Ro-Ro lane. But tens of thousands of cars, up until 20, 30, 40, 50 on a lane, I think is always doable.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to just kind of bring it back to what Charles was saying. I think we're talking about rethinking the network. We're talking about how we change the rail network. I think we need to kind of focus a little bit more on what the objective is. As you said, your job is to sell cars, right? So, but is it just to sell cars, or is it to focus on satisfying the customer, right? So, what's the problem that we're trying to solve?
Is that to me?
Yeah.
I don't look at it as a problem, but what I'm trying to do, we are the final option on a car. So it can be the fastest, the prettiest, all of the technological, whatever we want it. But again, if I can't get it to him, it's not going to be sold. So my problem is cost effectively, time effectively, and damage free to deliver. So those are the three things, and I'm export, and Charles is domestic, and the challenge for export is in many countries freight is also part of duty. In some of those countries, duty can be as high as 90%. So cost is an issue if my competitor who's in the room can do it for less than me. But at the same time, cost is irrelevant if I can't get it there when you need it. Because we have many people, and we do it, Donnie's the king of it actually, we air freight cars. I mean, some people say, we don't care, I want the car, I'll pay. So cost is relevant to the demand of that individual user. Yes, we try to design a program that meets everybody, but, and then there's other problems. So the other problem is internal. And so that's, like I said, I have an initiative this year where I have the design group, the manufacturing group, and the sales group on regular meetings discussing it. Because oftentimes sales, and I'll pick on the Middle East because we recently had an issue, where they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars marketing this new model and saying, hey, the cars are going to be for sale on October 2nd, whatever day, right? But factory doesn't really know that, and so the factory comes out with a production schedule, and they say, hey, we're going to have these cars here. And I say, yeah, but, it's going to take me 40 days to get this car over there. And the factory then says, well, why didn't you tell me? And it's an interesting thing. And then when they do give it to you, and I'll pick on the NSX that I brought up earlier, and so now you give me a $250,000 car, and I have no way to secure the vehicle to a vessel. And I'm saying, did you guys think about me getting this car to Abu Dhabi? And it's interesting, and because sometimes we'll have issues, and again, everybody's in a silo. And so I'll get the car, and I figure out how to get it to this guy on time, but because I don't have a way to secure it, maybe I ding a wheel or something like that. And you try to tell the design guys, hey, I need to ship this car. They say, well, when I gave it to you, there was nothing wrong with it. And I built it to spec. And I say, well, but your spec doesn't meet what I need to get it over there. And then you say, I do it. Well, it costs this much money to redo a diagram or drawings and da-da-da-da. So our challenges are not just your ability or these guys' ability to deliver it. It's at home as well. And, everybody's focused on, again, what they did yesterday, and they're focused on my job. And as well as cost. And a lot of times that cost is invisible because the factory says, hey, I got this much money, so I can't do another nickel on the car, right? So they pass the car to me, and so in able to deliver it, I got to spend another $20 to deliver the car because you didn't put that nickel on it. but because it's not out of the budget, it becomes invisible. So it's an interesting deal. So as much as I push my providers, I push back at home at the same time. And, you know, and again, maybe I have a reputation of being pushy, I don't know, but we get it done. And we keep pushing every day.
Sure. And in terms of the problem of the network, maybe it's not a problem, maybe it works, right? So, you know, we cars get their customers, maybe don't get them all on time as when we set them, but, you know, it works, right? So we move cars, we move 16, 17 plus million cars annually, right? So we want to find a way of doing that more cost effectively, right? As you said, right?
Yep.
But is that the only driver, right?
I mean, to me, I think, I don't have an issue with the word problem, but I mean, another way to put it is a puzzle. You know, it's like we're trying to solve a puzzle. And whether you're trying to solve it on a daily basis, like Charles mentioned, I mean, you know, sometimes you're just trying to solve the daily puzzle of how to get something from here to there as fast as I can today. That's the daily puzzle. But then, in addition, I think that you can make the daily puzzle easier to solve if you also take the network from a more global and a more big picture perspective and design a more efficient network. And efficiency, I think the key word there. I mean, that use the least transportation resources necessary, the least number of locomotive operating hours, the least number of driver hours, the least number of trucks, the least number of multi-levels. I mean, the more you can reduce the number of all those factors that you need, you reduce the cost for everybody, but you make the system more efficient and more lean too. And so you make the, you know, in addition to solving, at the same time that you solve the global puzzle, you've also made the daily puzzle easier to solve too. Because if we built the system in such a way that's very efficient, then it's not as difficult on a day-to-day basis to get the truck you need, or to get the rail car you need, or to get the vessel you need to make the movement today. That's my perspective.
Sure. Okay. Anything to add to that? So if we focus on that efficiency bit, what do we need to do as an industry in order to come together in order to do that? Right. So, as Charles said, truckers work in their silo, rail works in their silo, shipping works in theirs, and at some point you all come together, right? So whether it's the OEM or who plans that network, how that car's going to get from point A to point B, right? So what do you need to do, and what does the industry need to do in order to redesign this or rethink this to drive that level of efficiency? Yeah.
To me, I think that it's just you get a better solution the more information you have. You know, that basically if you're trying to solve a puzzle and you only have, I think the picture you had of the binoculars was very good. You know, I mean, if you're only seeing a small part of the puzzle, then you're going to, you know, you're going to get a wrong. You're not going to get the best answer you could get. And I think that in Charles' example, you know, of the gas tank too. I mean, the other guys were looking in the wrong place, right? I mean, the guys who were trying to solve the puzzle of why this car won't start they weren't looking at everything. If they'd looked at everything, they would have seen the solution. So I think that you get better solutions the more you look at. And so as an industry, what we end to do is each railroad, and no one's doing anything wrong, each railroad is looking at their own network mostly. Sometimes they'll look at the rest of the rail network, and they'll consider their customers. But when they're trying to optimize things, they're generally not trying to find the best way to flow a vehicle from Detroit to Los Angeles. They're trying to find a best way to move a rail car from Detroit to Los Angeles. And each party in the group does the same thing. Every trucking company does the same thing. They're trying to build their optimal load today for their truck. You know, they're trying to buy the correct number of trucks they need for their piece of the puzzle. Everybody's solving this puzzle individually, and basically you'll get a better solution if we try to solve the puzzle collectively. That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay. But as I've said before, first of all, a solution, there needs to be some money in the solution for the people that are doing it.
Yep.
because this is America. So if it's not about a profit, why would I do it?
Yep.
And so when you look at optimizing the network, so for instance, as I said, I short see. And for us, or for me, that was the best optimization.
Yep.
That was not a good optimization for the rail people because now I'm not railing them. So even if they knew about that solution, they probably wouldn't have brought it to me.
True.
Okay, and it goes the same. If I'm going to move, if the trucker's going to lose business because it's better for me to go on the rail, he's probably not going to share that solution with me. And so that's why I think it needs to be, it can't necessarily be a transportation provider who does the analysis because, you know, the quickest way to lose my job is to go find out how to help Toyota sell more cars.
Correct. Yep.
You know, even though it might be good for
Yep.
society,
Yep.
it's like, Charles, that didn't work.
Yep.
Okay, so it needs to be, I don't know, like maybe a group like FVL gets the data, does the analysis in a way that it doesn't directly impact a particular industry, but just say, here's the information.
Mm-hmm.
And then with this information, how do we make it for the better good? But like I said, as long as there's no money in it for someone, it's not going to happen. And then if it's actually a negative money, then there's going to be some blocks.
Yep. I agree. I think you're exactly right. I mean, that a barrier to this, and no individual entity, no single railroad, no single trucking company, no single OEM is going to do this on their own by themselves. They can't, or somehow it needs to be done jointly, and that's what makes it so hard, right? I mean, that's why this is such a difficult thing to do. Is that there has to be a lot of trust and a lot of cooperation and a lot of willingness to try to get it done. And those are things that, you know, are not in great supply all the time. Everybody's trying to do their own thing, and as you said, this is America. That's the way. You know, we're all trying to optimize our own thing. We're all trying to maximize our own profits. That's the way the system's built. That's the way it's structured. It's worked pretty well. But I think that by not collaborating in some fashion, and you're right, it's got to be some collaboration. And I don't know the entity, and I don't want to, advocate for any particular entity or not. But I think that there somehow needs to be, some entity that would facilitate that sharing of information and that sharing of analysis. And it's hard to do. Again, admittedly, it's very, very, very hard to do. But there's also no way to unlock that puzzle without doing it. I mean, there's a puzzle here to be solved. That the tools, the analytical tools, exist to solve this puzzle, but it can't be solved unless the parties want to solve it collectively and work to solve it collectively.
Interesting. Any comments from the...
Hi, my name is Ruud Vosbelt from Inform. Steve, great story that you mentioned. There is a big potential to do it much better. I think we have experience as well. There is a lot to win. But what we also notice from car makers itself, that there is already so much additional optimization to make in their internal companies. And I think that's maybe a reason as well, that before they jump in the big collaboration idea, that they want to make sure they have done their homework itself already good enough. And I imagine every car maker first need to work on their own homework, and there is a lot to win. And hearing Dan, we know there is 5 to 10% to win already in the individual networks from the car makers. But I imagine when they have made their own optimization and found their first 5 or 10%, then there is the additional optimization by having the collaboration in place. So it's more the question, okay, where can we find the starting point and make it maybe the little step and show to the world that this can work, that maybe two parties try something out and show what the benefit can be, and then the third party will join, because probably that gives more practical approach in making this move. And the big question would be, where can be this starting point? Is that a railroad company who invites us to do such a study, or is it AIAG, or is it 2 or 3 car makers who are willing to sit together and say, okay, let's make this jump? And we have tools available, you have a lot of data available, so I think together we can make a lot work already as a first case. But I don't know what you think is a good first step.
Yeah. I think I don't disagree with anything that you said. I think that there's and frankly, the most likely thing to happen, I think, is individual people optimizing their network. So I think that's the most likely thing to happen. The problem I have with that approach is that I think it'll just frankly take forever. That each individual, if you get one guy to optimize their network, and then somebody else does, and somebody else does, and then you get two to come together, and then three to come together. Every one of these things is going to take months to years, and so you end up being decades from now before you've ever really got everybody together. So you could try to grow in baby steps, and I think, frankly, what I know about this industry, I think that's what'll happen. But I guess I'm laying down a challenge to say, well, you can continue to take baby steps towards something like this. You can continue to sub-optimize. You continue to leave opportunity on the table. We all agreed when we talked about how we should do things that we're doing it wrong. I mean, basically that was kind of the point of my presentation. I asked you 3 questions about how should we do things. And we all agreed on how we should do things. And I think we can all agree we're not doing it the way we should. So we know the way we should do it. We know we're not doing it that way. And our solution is to baby step our way there, and maybe in a decade or two, probably I'll be senile before anybody has got this done. Some people may say I already am, but anyway, I guess that's my concern is that I think I would counsel to say, go bold and start at the end. I mean, jump right to the finish line, and don't take baby steps. Jump to the end. Get all the money. Is it hard? Absolutely. But people have to be. But you got to look at the prize, right? The size of the prize. If you were trying to do this for $1 million, you'd be ridiculous, But you look at that $500 million. I mean, it was nice to see your presentation where you guys said 5 to 10%. Is something, and I agree. I mean, I think that that's the kind of money out there. We're talking about potentially big bucks. Now, what you might be able to do is you might get everybody to throw their data in and do some preliminary analysis and find out if it's really in the order of 5 to 10%. And then you could decide the harder question of, okay, now how are we going to divvy this up? How are we going to really operationalize this? So what you might do with the short circuit thing is just try to have everybody agree, let's do the analysis somehow, and not necessarily agree that we're going to do anything about it, but let's just jointly do the analysis and find out how much is there. And maybe you do all that analysis, and maybe you'd find out there isn't that much there, and then you'd say, well, you know what, Trip was full of crap, and he wasted our time, but my view is it'd be worth the trip, right? It's worth testing to find out.
Sure. And is it also about how you pitch it, right? So we heard yesterday it's about you go to your CEO and you say, oh, this is going to, or in Charles' case, this is going to help me sell, £1 billion worth of more vehicles, then you'll probably have the ear. But if you go in there and say, oh, it's going to save me, it's going to have a cost reduction of £1 billion, then the dialogue is slightly different. So I think the dialogue is equally as important as what we're trying to achieve, right? So if I come into Charles and say, I'm going to help you sell, 1 million more cars next year, and I'm sure he'll be my best friend for life.
Yeah.
Or excuse me, sell the same amount of cars, but be able to get more profit margin per car.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
But see, right now, to say that we're saving the industry $500 million or whatever number that is, who gets the money? And so if it's not me, okay. I mean, there's no driving force for me. And I brought it up a couple of years ago. There is a solution that, it still wouldn't be easy, but for instance, I've seen it in another industry where a guy designed a software algorithm that enabled the transportation providers to validate if their contracts were profitable. And so you say, so in order to have a contract with my trucking company, my rail company, my vessel company, you have to put your data in here every month for the vehicles you ship. And basically they crunch those numbers and they're able to see if the discount rate or whatever they gave you actually was profitable at the end of every quarter. Okay, now on the other side of that, the OEM is able to do that as well, and even though they can't see particular OEMs, they can see how they compare to the industry. And so there right now you have two reasons why the seller and the buyer might play. And so now if you put that across all of it, now you have a database with everybody's information. And now you have it. So, and in that way there was a monetary gain or an efficiency gain for people to play, and at the end of the day you have a pool. But, and I think I said this in Baltimore 3 years ago, and the guy stood up and said, okay, I'll build it, but we haven't seen it yet.
I've heard that multiple times the last couple of years that people have suggested that your organization should sort of take a neutral role in this. Maybe a question for Louis is, are you guys considering that at all, or is that for one reason or another not an option to act as a neutral body?
That's a good question. I'm not sure we're ready to do something like that. There is a possibility that we might move into parts and sectors in this way, in a small way, but it's a bit of a plan and ambition at the moment rather than something we're particularly looking to do now. But it is something we have in the back of our minds. But I don't know who's in the room now. Is Brian Burkhart still in the room? Because I know he had a conference call. No, he's not in the room now. Because I know that on the service part side, there's some great benchmarking initiatives on that. Brian came from the service part side. Anu also from Volkswagen came from the service part side. So they were considering working with this organisation called Carlisle to try and do that. I'm not sure how it's worked or if it's developed, but I do think, that's something that needs to be done, and we need to put pressure on, whether you guys need to put pressure on us or we put pressure on our bosses. But I do think collaboration and sharing of information, that's something that's shone through definitely this conference and probably every conference we've ever done. So there has to be a solution found, and very quickly. Whether we can be part, we're happy to encourage it, we're happy to bring people together to do whatever it takes, but there has to be a solution found, and it has to be found quick. That's all I can.
Or is there a certain entity that you think would be better fit or best fit for that kind of role, for that neutral role?
There's a few different entities that I know of and I can think of. For some reason, it hasn't really worked. I know that sometimes the car makers and others are trying to work with them. It hasn't really worked fully yet. I'm not sure why it hasn't worked. But again, something to be examined. There's organizations in Europe, in China, and in North America where there's an attempt to do it, but it hasn't really worked. So maybe we have to look at it, rather than sit back and say it never really worked with them and then give up. Maybe we need to look harder to find the solutions, and identify who can possibly do it, and if they're not doing it well enough now, instead of giving up, actually going back and say, let's work harder to make it happen.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm sure there's a solution out there. I think we're approaching lunchtime now, so I don't want the food to get cold, and I see Louis, I can hear Louis' tummy grumbling. So, so thank you very much to the panel there. Thank you very much. Certainly an interesting discussion there, and I'm sure we'll continue to have these discussions about how we optimize things and make things better. But lunch is being served right outside. We'll be here again for 2 o'clock for the final panel session. So thanks very much again to the panel. Thank you very much.